Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Michael Gungor said, "Burnout is what happens when you try to avoid being human for too long." Well, according to a 2024 Global Talent Trends report, more than 8 out of 10 employees are at risk of burnout this year, and less than half of employers design work with well-being in mind. Well, in today's episode, we're going to talk about burnout, the signs to look out for, how we can prevent it, reclaiming and retaining joy, and more. My guest is the Associate Professor and Director of School Counseling at Gonzaga University. She holds a PhD from Idaho State University. Following an experience of severe burnout, she's dedicated to helping others challenge individual behaviors and beliefs that contribute to burnout and shines a light on the choices we make that insulate us from it. Please welcome the woman who intentionally seeks joy and offers hope to others who want to do life and work differently, Dr. Addy Wissel. Addy, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jay. I'm so excited to share and learn more.
Absolutely, as am I. And I really am so excited about our conversation today. It's such an important topic that we're going to address. And I always believe that everyone has a story and everyone's story matters. And yours is certainly one that matters. So we're going to dive into that. But I thought a good starting point for us would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
Oh, we're gonna just go right there. Okay, this is a great challenge. Um, let's see. I would say the thing that I like most about myself is my ability to adapt. And that's a muscle that I've really worked hard to grow. But, in my line of work, being a mama, being a partner, post-pandemic and living in a very complex world, I feel like adaptability and flexibility is really important. And so I feel like I really work to strengthen that muscle. So try not to let the small things get the best of me, or try not to feel derailed, or feel like things aren't overcomable. So I've worked really hard to strengthen that muscle. So I would say that's being adaptable is something that I really appreciate about myself.
I love that. That's a great one. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to dig a bit more deeply into that, some of the things specifically that you've worked on to strengthen that muscle. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I wanted to ask you something else just to explore a bit more about you. So if you were writing your autobiography, what would be the title that you would use as you look across your life up to this point?
Mm. Oh my goodness.
I know I'm putting you on the spot.
You really are. And I've actually thought about this. So this is kind of funny to me. I don't know. I think it would be something about, and we'll get into my story, but I'm really proud of being a farm kid. And so I think my experience being a farm kid has really informed, shaped, sometimes for better or worse, kind of where I am. And so I would say that it would certainly include that. So like maybe the joy of being a farm kid or something like that, that kind of captures multiple dimensions and seasons of life. Yeah, I like to nod where and honor where I came from, and also acknowledge that I've done a lot of work, Jay, to get to where I am now. And so it would be important for me to shine light on both or all those parts. So
That's
related to that, even
perfect.
though that's not succinct.
It's that's okay. You'll continue to refine that, and
Yeah.
once you bring that book to life, you reconnect with me, and we'll probably have another conversation.
Nice,
So
right?
that's wonderful. So let's talk about farm life. So you grew up on a farm, and this is a real working farm. So share with
Yeah.
us a little bit about your early backstory. And since you brought this up, I would love it if you would share with us what were some of those lessons that you learned through that experience that have informed and shaped the person who you are today.
Yeah, definitely. So yes, I am from a true working farm. I am a third generation, or my parents are third generation farmers. And so really proud of that. And yeah, growing up, I've always been on a farm. We grew up in a very small community and lived about 40 minutes outside of that community. And so, I could see our neighboring farm folks across the fields, but didn't really, wasn't living in like in a neighborhood or anything. It was quite rural. And my parents have always grown something, which I just think is such an honorable thing. So they've right now they grow sweet corn and pumpkins. Those are their two primary crops. And so I was just at the farm a couple of weeks ago, helping my parents get the land ready to plant the sweet corn. And so that's something that we've done since I was little. And so fast forward all of these years, it's still something that my sisters and I are still a part of. My parents still work all day, every day on the farm together, which I think is really remarkable. But some of the things that I think I really learned from kind of that upbringing, and perhaps specifically because of my parents, but that idea of adaptability and flexibility is just a must in farm life. There are so many external factors that you absolutely cannot control. Things like weather, things like if you have, an outbreak of crickets, badgers in your field, deer in your field. There's a lot of things that you can't account for, and you still got to figure it out. And so I think that's one of the greatest lessons is everything is figure outable. And we really believed that as a family before that even became a book. It's just kind of the way my family and my parents have raised us. And I think in part because, like I said, on the farm, so much of the elements are really beyond your control. And yet if you were to let yourself just kind of fall into a puddle because we didn't get enough rain, or we got too much rain, or the frost lasted too late in the season, then you wouldn't have a product come harvest time, and that would really impact your family. And so you have to be adaptable. Yeah.
So it reminds me as you were talking about the things that are outside of our control and then knowing the things that are within our control. It just reminds me of that sentence or that saying, control the controllables. And that's often used in sports, but it applies in life, it applies in farming, it applies in business in general.
Absolutely.
And so if you think back when you were growing up in that environment, what was, maybe give us an example or a brief story of a time when you and your family experienced something that was outside of your control and the impact that that had and how your family was able to come together to solve whatever that situation happened to be.
Oh gosh, there were lots of those. One of the most recent ones I think of, and I guess if you're not familiar with farm life, it might be kind of difficult to kind of understand the impact of this type of situation. But so when we harvest, and we'll get our boxes ready of corn, for example, and you've got the hull getting ready to go to the grocery store. Well, you're coming from, where my parents farm. It'll be in the hundreds in terms of temperature, and you freshly pick the corn and you get it loaded up and you put it into the truck to cool, and you ice it and you do all of the things that you can to bring the temperature of the corn to a certain level. Well, when they take it to the warehouse for particular grocers, the warehouse folks check the temperature. And if the corn doesn't get to the certain temperature, they'll reject your entire load. You're talking thousands of dollars in a load, right? I mean, you're talking hours of labor, seed cost, water, right? Like there's so many costs that were associated with that entire load, and the warehouse can simply say, "Sorry, the corn is too warm. We're not accepting this load." So then what do? You've poured, like I said, resources into this harvest, and the store won't take it. Well, I don't know a lot of people that are going to eat that many ears of corn, right? Like that's thousands and thousands. And so, that's a small example where then we had to get really creative about, well, what do we do with this? This is a perfectly fine crop to eat. It just didn't meet that temperature requirement in that particular warehouse. And so it's funny, we have a family chat, and, dad will send something that's gone awry on the farm. This example would be one of them. And we just kind of brainstorm together, like, okay, who can we call? What produce stands in the area might take a few extra boxes? Where can we, and we just kind of divide and conquer. What's cool about everybody in my family is we've got different strengths and talents. And so my sister might get on Facebook and do this beautiful graphic that kind of lets people know what's available. And so we just kind of, like I said, divide and conquer. We know that we can't just let the corn sit in the trailer and rot. We're time limited because it's perishable, right? And so that's just a small example, but really an impactful example because, like I said, that reflects a lot of resources that we've poured into it, and it represents income for my family. And so I think just that's a small example of how, we come together, we brainstorm, and we figure it out. Again, yes, is it frustrating? Of course it is. But if we just sat there and kind of complained about how frustrating it was, or how having 2 degrees too warm corn is kind of silly, maybe in our minds, we're expending a lot of head and heart energy, and yet we're left with the same problem. So, coming together and brainstorming and kind of divide and conquer has been a way that we move forward.
That's a very powerful example, and I appreciate you sharing that. And there are a number of lessons that you shared in that example, in that story. As I was listening to you, I'm thinking about how that is applicable in so many different areas. And what I really appreciated about what you shared was the focus was on finding the solution versus staying in the problem. Does the problem exist? Of course it does. But if we don't adjust our optics to looking for the solution, then we miss the greatest opportunities, right? We stay stuck. And in addition, the idea of teamwork, of coming together, of resourcing the people that are around you, kind of building that brain trust, if you will. In this case, it's family, right? But you have the ability to bring everyone together. And you had already mentioned that each of you have your own strengths, right? Your areas of expertise, and that you can all come together in like a mastermind, if you will, right? And so I really appreciated that. And then to take it a step further, okay, now how do we each take an area that we know that we can manage, the divide and conquer piece of it, right? You don't have one person doing all the heavy lifting. You figure out a way how each of you can take a piece of this, be held accountable for it, execute on the solution, and it's amazing what happens when we figure out how to work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it allows us to be more efficient. I mean, like I said, especially in that example, we were under a time crunch. And so it really required people to lean in and move very quickly. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Now, since you mentioned your sisters, do they? So in this example, obviously everyone was brought in to look for a solution. Do your sisters still have involvement with the family farm, or do they have lives of their own and following their own career paths?
Yeah. Much to Dad's kind of perhaps dismay, none of us are farmers in terms of our careers, but we all very much support the farm and support our parents in the ways that we can. None of us live where the farm is currently, but like I said, we all we're on those family texts, or we've all taken turns this year going and helping. My dad broke his leg this spring, right in the middle of planting season.
Oh.
And so it required, again, there's another problem, right? And so we've all taken turns going to the farm and helping, and so we've had to figure it out. Again, we couldn't just wait for those 6 weeks to pass when Dad couldn't put weight on his leg, because then you miss the window, then you don't have anything to harvest. So we all help when we can.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I want to tie back to what you said at the beginning of our conversation when I asked you what your favorite thing was about yourself, and you mentioned your ability to adapt and that you have worked to strengthen that muscle of adaptation. So speak to the ability to strengthen that muscle. So give us an idea of some of the specific things that you've done to work on that, knowing that that was an area of improvement for you. And where are you today? So it's an area that it sounds like you're obviously proud of yourself for making great progress there. What did you do specifically? And do you feel like you are in a place today where you can handle and adapt to any situation that comes your way?
I would say most things. You can't always anticipate all of the things, and I'm sure, especially as I'm evolving, I can imagine that there will be things that emerge that I find more difficult to navigate. But really, it was again, I mentioned that my parents have been a real model of this for me for a long time, but it didn't sink in until my professional life. Sadly, I wish I could say, by fourth grade, I had this locked in. I didn't. And I really think that my inability or, I just didn't have the muscle for it, really impacted and contributed to my burnout. And so a lot of the work that I have done, whether it's adaptability or reclaiming and retaining joy, came as a result of really experiencing severe burnout and recognizing that I had a choice to make. Like, I could choose to do life differently. And did it require work? Absolutely. But I was in a position that I knew that I could no longer live the way that I was living at that moment. And so the adaptability piece became one of those muscles that I strengthened. And I would say kind of the process for that, in other ways that I've really worked to grow, is it required me to just sit in some reflection. And I was listening to your podcast with Amy, and it really reminded me of that, because I was thinking that, that reflection is what really allowed me to kind of look at myself from all angles, upside down, topsy-turvy, inside, outside, all of those things, and really begin to look at and see what was I doing that was serving me well, and what was I doing that was contributing to some pain for me. And my adaptability was one of those things. So it started with a lot of reflection. I didn't like the way it felt to be so inflexible. I didn't like the way disruptions in my life left me feeling. I would feel very frustrated. I would be very irritable. I would allow those small disruptions to really impact the rest of my day. And so it started with that, with really exploring what was serving me well and what wasn't. And that adaptability piece was one of those first pieces that I knew, like, this isn't helping me. I felt like it was impacting my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my kids, my relationships with my parents, because it would manifest with, like I said, impatience or irritability. And for me, I just was having a hard time adapting to the plan that I thought was in place, or maybe a way that I thought that we should go, or a hope that I had. And I would really allow it kind of take control. So it started with reflection.
So, and we're gonna go back to that
Sure.
piece around reflection and some of the things that you learned about yourself, some of the tools that you were able to discover that helped you to be able to strengthen that muscle. But since we've kind of skirted around it a little bit, let's go to the story that ultimately led to that state, or that place of burnout. So take us back to what transpired and speak to how one comment, one conversation with someone can have such a tremendous impact, positively or negatively, on who we are as individuals. So tell us that story.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really think it's been a lifetime of a story. And again, after some reflection, I really think that it was something that had been building in me. And so that kind of moment of, or experience in burnout, was really the tipping point. But I really think, coming up, and I'll keep speaking about the farm, but when I was little, I remember an assignment in second grade where we were asked, what do we want to be when we grow up? And in my second grade mind, I knew I had very limited options. I knew I could be a farmer, and I thought, no, thank you. My parents work very hard. It just felt kind of stressful. That just wasn't for me. I knew I could be a classroom teacher because my experience had been in school, right? But I also thought, there's no way I want to be a teacher. Like, that just sounds terrible for me, which is funny. And because here I am. And I knew I could be a lawyer, which is also interesting because I don't really remember where that came from. And as I talk about this, I remember watching like a lot of Perry Mason and Matlock. And so I don't know if I saw myself in either one of them. Certainly I don't look like Matlock. But I remember in second grade thinking, I'm going to be a lawyer. So second grade comes and goes, and I'm on this path to be an attorney. And I carried that with me through undergraduate. I was a political science major. I thought, for sure, I'm going to go to law school. This is what I'm going to do. This is my path. And I kind of had a sharp edge to myself at the time. And I thought, oh, that's going to be a real strength of mine in that moment. And after graduate school, or after finishing my undergraduate, I took a job with the governor's office and thought, this is going to be a really great place for me to get some experience. I thought maybe lobbying, or maybe, criminal law or something, and thought, this will be good. And it wasn't until I picked up my master's, completed a master's in criminal justice while I was working there, because I just was like, I need to be like working towards something, like reading and writing and all of that. I did a study, and I was looking at families involved in highly contentious child custody battles as part of kind of my capstone project. And in that, it was an opportunity for these families to learn from a child psychologist, a counselor, a mediator, and a lawyer about how to co-parent differently. And I just remember watching that whole experience unfold, and really just being so curious and really wowed by this idea that people could be trained to be in community differently. And we're talking about couples or former partners or co-parents who could not be in the same space together. They had multiple court proceedings between the two of them. And so really, some of them were quite nasty, relationships, really difficult relationships. And so over the course of those 6 to 8 weeks, to watch these people begin to, not that they became friends or even liked each other, but they developed skills to be able to co-parent effectively together. And I just thought that that was incredible. And so after that, I decided, you know what, it's not law for me. Like, I think that the law part is interesting, but I wanted to have a different kind of impact. And so quit my job randomly on a lunch break one day, and then told my husband that I had quit my job. That's not always the best approach. And then started graduate school in counseling right after that, and really shifted my path. But along those ways, I was, I had these moments where I was quite critical of myself, a lot of doubting. Who am I? Why do I think I should be here? Who am I to think that I'm a good helper? And so when I switched over to higher education, that's where things became very, very apparent that perhaps I was the one unlike the others. And so I mentioned kind of that first part of the story because all along the way, there was a lot of self-doubt mixed with curiosity, feeling kind of like I never quite fit where I was at any given time. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to get my PhD and I'm going to do this. And this is going to be it for me. And it's going to bring joy and happiness. And after I achieve this, then that'll be it. Right. And it did for a while, worked in higher education. And then I realized I'm entering another system. And in that system, I was new to higher education. And of course, when you're a professor, you have feedback that your students give you at the end of every semester, evaluating your teaching practice and your effectiveness and the way they experience you as a person. And, I, again, was thinking about all of the things. Do I belong here? Should I be here? Why did Gonzaga pick me? They must have just needed a warm body. I'm a first in family student, and so again, I had all of these ideas that I don't really belong here. And so I entered my teaching experience with these ideas that I was carrying. And so when those evaluations came back, one of the evaluations from my student said, nothing about my teaching, nothing about my effectiveness, not even anything about the way they experienced me as another human, but solely said, I like when you wear that green dress. And that just kind of stopped me in my tracks. I certainly was not experiencing or expecting that. And it was interesting when I was processing with my colleagues, some colleagues were like, oh, well, what a nice compliment. And I was like, no, because the way I interpreted it was through my own lens. And for me, that comment reinforced the idea, you don't belong here. You aren't meant to be in higher education. Who are you to think that you can do this, right? And so for me, it reinforced that for me. And after I received that feedback, I kind of moved into, I don't really like the word hustle and grind, but I really moved into that mode to the point of it being unhealthy because I was determined to prove that I not only belonged there, but that I was going to be really good at my work, which again, maybe on the surface sounds good. But what happened was that became my sole focus. I lost sight of my family. They took a back seat. I ignored things in my health. I would say, oh, this must just be what it's like to be a professional mom or a mom with a profession. I experienced empathy blocks and really struggled to convey and experience empathy for another person, which is quite frightening. Um, and I talk about the fact that I really feel like I lost my joy in that experience. I talk about myself being a shell of a human. Like I really was just operating to get the checklist done in higher education, like making sure I had all of the right things in play to get that next level of tenure and promotion, which is really important in our world or in our academic world. And so for me, it came crashing down very, very quickly.
I want to push pause for just a moment because I'm just curious the way that you were feeling about yourself before the evaluations and before you received this one student's evaluation. You listed off a number of things that you were thinking to yourself. Mm-hmm. Were you aware of the way that you were talking to yourself, the things that you were saying? Was there a sense of self-awareness there? Or was this running in the background, but you just didn't really know it until everything began to fall apart and then the discovery started to happen?
Yeah, I think on some level I probably did, right? Like, wow, there's some negative self-talk there happening, I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
part of it probably is my training. So I know that kind of conceptually, but no, I didn't know to that level the impact that it was having on me. And like I said, it wasn't until I was able to sit in reflection and really do some thinking that I began to piece it together. Because Jay, and what was kind of, and this is kind of an interesting thing, and perhaps listeners can also maybe see themselves in this, is all throughout kind of when I was experiencing burnout, I was still doing all the things. I had a colleague be like, I had no idea you were struggling. I was winning awards for my teaching. I was creating new programs and opportunities in my community. I was doing all of the things. And so people didn't know that I was experiencing this inside. And so I find that to be really interesting.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
What was your family either saying to you? What was their concern about the way that you were showing up at this stage? Here on one side, you're showing a certain way about yourself, right? To use your terminology, you're hustling and you're grinding, right? Mm-hmm. You're getting it done. But on the other side of that, personally, and you mentioned the effect that this had on your family, what were they saying?
Not a lot. I am so fortunate to have an incredible support in my husband. I think they kind of weren't quite sure what to do. My husband is really good about giving me time and space. I identify as an introvert too, and so when I get home from work, I need a moment to recharge. And so I think part of it was that I think they too were watching me navigate this tremendous sense of responsibility and knew that, it is important for mom to work hard because mom does have to make to the next level. If you're not in higher education, tenure and promotion might not mean a whole lot. But for us, if you're not awarded tenure and promotion, it means you don't get to keep your job. And so to achieve those ranks is important. It was important for me as a mom. I had moved my family here for this opportunity. And so I felt a deep responsibility to make sure that I was successful so that my family could stay here. So I think on one part it was, oh, mom's working hard because this is what she's here to do. Um, and our kids were younger. And so my husband was busy getting people to football practice and basketball practice and picking up from childcare and, doing all of those things for me. And so I think our family unit in and of itself was also in high motion. And so perhaps me kind of being in motion over here maybe didn't super feel totally different for them. What I will say, and now that my husband and I have kind of talked about what I was experiencing, I did do things like I wouldn't go to my son's athletic events. Or if I did, I would sit on one end of the bleachers when all of our friends and like schoolmate families were sitting on the other end in community. I would sit over here on the edge by myself because I had no capacity or bandwidth to engage. And so for me, it showed up more in that way. I would be a little bit more isolative in those moments. Yeah, I missed out on a lot.
So let's keep talking about the signs.
Yeah.
So as you're speaking to our audience, for those who may be experiencing burnout, but they don't quite know if that's what it is, right? They're just experiencing something, but they're trying to understand, why am I feeling this way? Why is this happening to me? And what can I do about it? So you've given some examples. So what are some other areas that we should be looking out for? What are some specific signs? And I know that each person is different, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And they may have a different experience, but you speak from your own personal experience plus the knowledge that you've gained since then. Help us out with some of those signs.
Sure. Yeah. And you're right to say this is a hugely unique and individual experience. And so some people might experience certain symptoms and other people will experience it in very different ways. So I really appreciate that. For one, exhaustion is a huge one. Feeling fatigue and exhausted. The moment you wake up, you're already feeling exhausted, and it's mentally and physically, emotionally exhausted. And this one is one that I think we're really easy to find an excuse or a reason. Like we're quick to use logic of why I'm feeling this way, right? Like I mentioned before, I'm a mom and a professional. That must be why. And I must have to feel this way in order to do both, right? And so whether you're a mom or not, or a dad, or, caregiver of any sort, even if it's animal children, we're really quick to find a reason for why we're feeling so exhausted, but truly exhaustion is a sign. So I would say if you're feeling exhaustion, be curious about it, be caringly curious about what might be happening. Is it something related to, like, is there an actual reason, or is there something else there? But I think we're real quick to kind of push that away. I can remember for me, I was driving home from work one day and I was at a stoplight and I completely fell asleep at the stoplight.
Wow.
And it wasn't until the car behind me honked that I realized I had fallen asleep at the stoplight. That's scary. That's not normal, Jay, right? Like, that's not normal. But again, I was like, oh, I must just be really tired. It's like, I think that's more than that, So that, not that everyone has to fall asleep at a stoplight, but we're talking about exhaustion, and even after you feel like you've gotten some rest, you're still waking up feeling tired. So that's a big first clue.
Okay.
The next one is mental and emotional distancing. So I describe this as being kind of that empathy block for me. Other people experience it differently. They have to, often for their own self-preservation, they put kind of a distance, like I'm not able to mentally engage with you. I'm not able to emotionally connect with you or for you. And so if you notice that you're seeing a disconnect there, that could be a sign. Again, for me, I had real difficulty connecting with another person with empathy because I was so busy keeping myself intact that it was really difficult for me to give to another. That could be another way that it shows up.
Okay.
Another one is low self-efficacy. So again, I might be doing all the things, right? Again, I was doing quote unquote quite well, but boy, I felt like I was kind of a D minus in all categories of my life. I was a D minus at work, a D minus at home, a D minus, right? Across the board. So feeling like I'm not doing a great job. Like I'm really struggling to do this well. So I would say those are kind of the three they're the three primary ways. Of course, there are others, but I think those ones show up often for working professionals. And again, I think the ones that are easily kind of put to the side, or we find a logical reason of why it could be.
Okay, so just to recap to make sure that I understand this, we've got exhaustion. We have mental and emotional distancing, and we have low self-efficacy. Those are kind of the three big ones, if you will. And I think your point that you made that's such a powerful and important one is to start to ask better questions. So if you're experiencing any of this, be curious about it.
Yes.
Right? It may not be burnout, but it may very well be. So if we start to explore that a bit more deeply and maybe have conversations with a professional, right? If we can talk through this, maybe it can help save us some time and some unnecessary feelings that we ultimately could go through if we're not watching out for this. So let's then look at the other side of the coin and talk about the solutions, because we know that there are specific things that we can do, right? Sure. You've outlined some of these things. You speak to these things. So share with our audience what some of the things are that you would suggest and recommend that have worked and that you believe can make a significant difference and impact.
Sure. Yeah. And again, this is going to be such an individual process and experience because what I might suggest may not work for another person, and that's okay. And I think part of it is, that being okay when something doesn't work doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, doesn't mean, again, that you're not going to be able to overcome this, because I think when you're in the midst of it, sometimes it feels that way. Like, I should just be able to do this one thing and feel better. Like, what's wrong with me? And so I don't want anybody to hear that. I want people to think, here are a couple of ideas. Maybe I'll try one on and see how it fits. And if it doesn't fit, it's not an opportunity to beat ourselves up about it. It's an invitation to try something else. So I start with that because I think that was an important part of my experience as well.
Perfect.
And yeah. So I have a couple of things, and I can't highlight or emphasize the importance of getting quiet. For me, that was transformational. And after I received tenure and promotion, I was given the opportunity to have a sabbatical, which is such a gift. And I just, if I could be like in charge of the world, I would give everybody sabbaticals because it just is so important. And I decided, for sabbatical, I knew I had to be out of town when my students returned to school, because I knew that if I stayed in town when my students returned to school, I would have the need to check in on them. How's it going? What do you need? I would want to check in on my colleagues and make sure everything was going okay. When during sabbatical, really, you're to step away from the office, right? Like you're not to be engaging. That's no longer your duty, or you're on pause for a minute, right? And
defeats the purpose of a sabbatical.
Right? Yeah, it's like go on sabbatical, but actually be on campus and check in with your students all day. No. So I knew I needed to be away. So I booked myself a week-long solo trip to the desert. I went to Arizona, and it was the first time I had traveled by myself for any reason. Like, I'd only ever traveled for work, for conferences and board meetings and things like that, but I'd never traveled for myself. And so I booked this trip. I went down to Arizona and got up and I was like, I'm going to go to the pool today. Great idea. Well, I load up and I get all my stuff ready. And Jay, I go to the pool. I have 5 books I'm going to read for pleasure. I have one data set of a research study I had conducted, and I was going to do a thematic analysis. I had a journal article that I was there and I was going to do a revision on. And I had a bucket list that I had completed way back in grad school, and I was going to do an audit on my life to see how much I had accomplished. Okay, so head down to the pool, all of my stuff in hand, get there, find myself this cozy spot. And I proceed to work the entire day. And, they have folks there at the pool who were, offering snacks and drinks. Oh, man, would you like a beverage? No, no, no. I'm here to work. Thank you anyway, right? Which I look back now and I'm just like, wow, I was not okay. So proceeded to be there the entire day and packed up, went back to my room, got up the next day, getting my bags ready to do the same thing. This time, though, for whatever reason, when I stepped out, I looked up. And that moment, it sounds too big to say changed my life, but like truly, it was magnificent. Like I had realized that I hadn't looked up the entire trip. And as I sat in reflection kind of over the course of my time there, I really couldn't remember the last time I had like looked up and experienced awe. And I just was like stopped in my tracks. I got teary-eyed. I mean, the blue sky, it was just this vibrant, beautiful color. And I can remember the saguaro cacti. Like we don't have that where I live. And the blossoms on the different foliage and plants. And I just remember being struck by how incredibly beautiful the scenery was. And so right after that, put my stuff back in the room. And the rest of the week I spent reading those 5 books for pleasure, worked out when I wanted, did a puzzle, drank wine, cried when I needed to, stared up, to the sky when I felt like that's what my body and my mind and heart required. And, it changed my life. And so that experience of looking up, I would say, is one of my tips. When I walk around campus right now, you see people like this, and I know people listening can't see me, but they're looking at their device. Their heads are down and they're walking, and they are missing so much beauty around them, to say nothing about like the community and engagement with other people. But we really forget to notice. And so a tip that I would say, if you're experiencing any kind of burnout, or even if you're experiencing like, wow, I'm maybe in a rut or whatever, look up, be in awe, marvel at something. It really, I would say, kind of launched me for the rest of the weekend, for the rest of my time, really started the healing process for me.
I love that. I think that's so important. And I know there's more to this, which I want to get to, but getting quiet and looking up. I mean, I think we all know there's a time for heads down.
Sure.
When we're doing the work, but there's also an equally as important time to look up, be aware of your surroundings, appreciate, take nothing for granted.
Yes.
And I think that's such a great example that you gave, and also a beautiful place in the country to be. Yeah. But we can all find that no matter where we are, whether we're in New York City, whether we're on the farm, whether we are just walking outside in nature, whatever it takes. I think you've nailed on a couple key areas right there. So keep going down this path of the things that we can do to address or avoid burnout.
Yeah. So, well, I just want to add to what about that, but I think about like at the workplace too. You can look up and be in conversation during a walk and talk. So I mean, I think we can even infuse it into our daily lives rather than, sitting around a conference table. Like, get up and walk about and have conversations and together notice. Um, we've done that on campus before, and we've learned lots of things about trees and stuff that other colleagues knew about that I had no idea. And so, it can create another opportunity in that way. So,
Perfect.
um, so one of the other things I want to kind of expand a little bit on the get quiet. When I left on sabbatical, I had a colleague who told me, give it 4 minutes when you come back. And all of that will come back to you, like meaning all of that, meaning the burnout, the rush, the grind. And I can remember when that colleague told me that, one, I was kind of annoyed because I was like, really, could you just say congratulations, enjoy your time? But no. And so in that moment, when that individual told me that, I knew again that I was going to do the work differently. I could not, would not return and go right back to the way I was. It wasn't sustainable, it wasn't healthy, and it was not joyful. So again, that getting quiet piece was big. And people have often asked me like, well, yeah, that's really nice. You were able to go for a week-long trip and you had a sabbatical and, yeah, you had opportunity to get quiet. And what I want people to realize is getting quiet can happen when we prioritize it, right? And we can get creative about how we get quiet. And the reason why I think getting quiet is so important is that is when we can, one, reflect, of course, but that's when those creative juices start pumping. And we can really begin to dream, right? Like, people don't dream over the course of the day. I certainly didn't. Like, I did. When do I have time to dream? Like, between work and making dinner and going to the basketball game, like, when do I have time to dream? And so getting quiet is really an opportunity for us to, again, reflect, but also imagine, dream, get curious, get creative. And so now, sorry, Jay.
No, you're good. I was going to give you an example of one of the ways that I get quiet, and this may sound counterintuitive, but I schedule time in my calendar to go to the gym early in the morning. I'm typically up at between 4 and 4:15 each morning, and I go to the gym, and quite frankly, that becomes quiet time for me. You wouldn't think so because there's a lot of activity, there's music playing, but I find space and solace in that area. Yeah. And so I'm able to just quiet my mind, close everything else off. And I use that time for reflection, for thinking, for feeling my feelings. Mm-hmm. And because I've struggled throughout my life of not feeling and pushing emotions down. So I use that opportunity to really explore that. And so I thank you for mentioning that. And I think to your point, we can all find a way. There's a solution to every problem, and we all have the same number of hours in a day. Obviously, we're all doing different things, right? You're a professional, you're a mom, you have lots of different responsibilities. But we can always carve out moments, even if it's just mere moments, to find that quiet and that peace. It's so important.
Oh, so true. Yeah, I love that example. And I think that's perfect because what I'm not suggesting that now we all have to go do mindfulness or something. I think people kind of have this idea of what it means and looks like to get quiet, and then it's like, well, I can't do that, or I don't have time for that. And it's like, no, we got to again get creative about what that looks like for us. For me, it's as simple as I have a Target near my house. Well, if I'm going to do a Target pickup and I know I need to get quiet, I might schedule the pickup to be at the Target on the opposite side of town for me. And I can drive in silence or with music that I find to be uplifting or encouraging, and I can get quiet in that way. And so, it's capturing those windows and recognizing that we can do something meaningful with even 10 minutes of time.
Love it. So
Yeah.
speak to minding your language.
Yeah. Oh, this is one that I teach my students about too. So minding your language is something that, again, after reflection, I was thinking about what's serving me well, what's not. And what I came to realize was some of the words that I was using was actually contributing to my burnout and actually taking from my joy. And so there are words that I no longer use. One is busy. You will not hear me say the word busy because when I think of busy, for whatever reason, I have a physiological, like I respond to that. I have a reaction. I feel my stress level increase just because I say busy. And so when people are like, oh, you must have a busy week ahead, or I'm so sorry, I know you're busy, I offer a reframe. I just do not use that word. And I will tell you,
It's a
and
trigger. It's a trigger word for you.
yeah, it's really activating for me. And so I haven't used it, Jay, with intentionality since 2020.
Good
I
for
mean, I've
you.
shared it now, but like it's something that I've really worked hard to eliminate because, again, it was not helping me. So that's a big one. Another one that I am really cognizant of is disaster. We use disaster all of the time. It's like, oh, this is a disaster. This is a disaster. And I think, is it really? Is it really a disaster? Because when I think of disaster, I think of destruction. I think of harm. I think of natural disasters that leave just this path of like damage. And so I've talked to even my colleagues and my students about that. Like, is it really a disaster? Because a disaster feels big and heavy and difficult to overcome. And I find that we call things disasters that are really like, yeah, is this uncomfortable? Sure. Is this unfortunate? Yeah. Is it annoying? Of course. Is it not what we had planned? Certainly. Can we get through it? Yeah. But when we start speaking about things as disasters, then what happens is that we all kind of get into this feeling. And then I think it really changes the way the team is able to navigate together.
Yeah, that's definitely a powerful one. So I love the fact that you're intentional about that you've identified those words, that language that takes you down a negative path, and you look for ways to reframe that. So let's keep going because I think that's an important one. So you also talk about thinning out our social media. Ooh, this is an important one. So speak to
I,
that briefly.
yeah, yeah. So again, this one was interesting for me, but again, I was looking for those things, what's serving me, what's not. And even the accounts that you would think maybe would be inspiring or, oh, wow, we're like minded, or we're in a similar season of life, or we're in a similar profession. Um, what I found was what was happening for me is when I would open those accounts, I began to compare how far I was in my career. What am I feeding my kids versus what that mom was feeding her kids? How am I, am I doing the right ab workout? Am I eating carbs this week or am I not eating carbs? And when I first started following these folks, it was because I saw something in them that I either admired or I appreciated, or like I said, I found some kind of connection to them. But as I was going through my journey of healing, I found that even the people that I really admired and held in high regard, it wasn't for me in that moment. And so I went through my social media, Facebook and Instagram is really what I have in those regards, and unfollowed several people. And again, it wasn't that I don't like them or I didn't like their content. It was just in this moment, it wasn't helping me. In fact, it was hurting me, and especially in the professional domain. So like I said, other professors and colleagues that I really did admire, it wasn't for me in that moment. And it
I
doesn't
really
mean,
appreciate.
yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I'm sorry. No,
Yeah,
finish your thought. I'm sorry.
no, I was just going to say, and it doesn't mean that I couldn't follow them again in the future. It's just not for now.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. This is one that has really been significant for me because so much of the work that I do is tied to social media, to marketing, to, attracting, coaching clients, etc. And I find, just like you did, and I think it's just human nature, that when we see someone, we tend to let go of the things that we've accomplished. We tend to forget about the progress that we've made, and we look at someone else and say, well, why is that person further ahead than I am? How come I'm not in that same place? Or how come they have a better abs than I do? Whatever it happens to be. And that's a very dangerous place to spend your time. And talk about a way to spin out of control. That's definitely one of those areas. Now, I think it's good to be inspired by others. But if we're going to compare, let's compare ourselves to who we were a year ago, 2 years ago, and celebrate the progress that you've made. We can't spend our time worrying about what someone else is doing, but it goes back to controlling the controllables. Right. We have no control over someone else, but we can control our own attitude, our own actions, our own behaviors, etc. So that's a powerful one. I feel you on that one.
Yeah.
So speak to decreasing the number of decisions that we make in a day.
Yeah. So what I noticed too was that by the time I showed up to work, I was already exhausted. Again, I talked about exhaustion being perhaps a component of burnout for some people. But I would be at work and I would already be done. Like I don't have any more space or, solutions to offer. I am just done. And that's not okay. I have to be present and able to be 2 and 4 people at work. And so showing up in that headspace was, again, contributing to me feeling burned out, low self-efficacy, all of those things, right? It was contributing to that. And so what I've done now is try to reduce the number of decisions that I'm making before I even get to work, so that when I get to work, I have capacity to serve. And I want to serve, right? And so things like packing my lunch the night before, again, seems really silly. And so I just want to say, for the people who are listening, if they're like, I'm already doing this, I want to say, like, heck yes, keep doing it, because it can be helpful. So packing my lunch ahead, planning my outfits, as silly as that sounds, ahead of time. I can't tell you how much time I've spent just staring in my closet and like, what do I wear? I don't want to waste time doing that. So I plan that the night before. I also set out my workout clothes the night before. I don't want to have to think about, where are my running shoes? Do I have socks? Like, all of those little decisions add up. And so by the time you get to the office, you don't want to have already made 372 decisions, so that by the time you arrive, you just are already feeling depleted, which is how I was experiencing it. Yeah.
That's so good. I mean, we all only have but so much bandwidth.
Yes.
And you made an important point, and that is that the small things add up, right? These may seem like small, insignificant decisions, but they're not. No. Right? They appear to be at the surface level, but it's like compound interest.
Yes,
right? The magic of compound interest. Those little small decisions, they stack up, and the small things become the big things. So Ooh. You are so on point with that one. And then let's talk about choosing your free time activities wisely. Why is this important?
Yeah. Well, I just want to add one more thing to that last part is,
Sure.
I just believe so much that we impact the space that we're in. And so if I'm already showing up to a space, then I'm potentially negatively impacting my department, my colleagues, my office, my agency, wherever it is that I'm working. And like, why would I want to be the person that's bringing that kind of energy to the space, you know? So I just think, they do feel like small decisions, but man, it really could impact the way people experience you and the way that people experience, just the workplace in general. So I just think
Well
it's
said.
powerful. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. What was the last question that you just asked me?
So choosing your free time activities wisely and why that's important.
Oh, yeah. I just think that just like with anything else, I think we've got to figure out what it is that uh, kind of restores us. And I was reminded by this because often I'm now department chair in my department at school, and I often talk about, make sure you get your rest, make sure you get your rest. And I had a colleague who said, not all of us need rest. And I was like, oh, that's a really good point. You're right. Maybe I just need rest. But we got into a conversation about, we all need something different. And so while I might need 30 minutes at the end of my day to just zone out, which is protected time that I've kept in place since 2020, or for some people, it's, I need to have a phone call with a loved one on my way home from work. But it's knowing what you need that is restorative for you. And again, I think that can emerge when one gets quiet, because we might think, oh, I just need to go knock out 3 miles on the treadmill. That's what I need. It's like, well, is it what you need? Or is it what maybe like something on Instagram said you need, or maybe like your colleague said they needed? And so you think that that's for you too. And so I feel like that's a personal, kind of exploration that an individual has to do. For me, it's quiet time. I love my family, but I've got to have individual alone time. That's a priority for me. And I make it happen.
Good
And
for
so,
you.
I think it's what's knowing what it is that you do that is restorative. That feels like when you're done, then okay, now I can move on to the next thing, or I can engage differently now. But if the thing that you're doing now is depleting you, then perhaps we're not quite in alignment yet. We haven't found the thing.
Absolutely. And I think really just to that point is finding, right, doing different things,
Yes.
exploring, right, and
Yes.
trying to find the thing that does give you energy, that allows you to restore versus continuing to suck your energy. So to
Right.
go back to the example that you gave when you went on that week-long trip, day one, you show up and you bring all the stuff and you're going to dive in to do the work.
Right.
And that wasn't restorative for you. But the moment you flipped the switch and looked up, right, something changed, right? That created a very different experience for you, more of a restorative experience, and it began a different journey for you. So these are great tools that we can all work with. And again, for everybody that's watching and listening right now, this is a very individualized experience. So you've received some great information here, some amazing insights. Make sure that you're trying things to see what fits, that works with your lifestyle, that allows you to find a place where you can do that type of self-exploration and that reflection, and start to put some of these tools into practice and see what works for you, and be prepared to adjust as needed, be flexible, but realize that there is a solution there for you, and ask for help whenever you need help. Find a professional that you can talk to that can help you walk through this process, because you're not on this journey alone. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to first thank you again, Addy, so much for joining us today. I've got one more question for you, and we've got your social handles, so we'll go ahead and put some information there on how people can reach out and connect with you. So my question is this: as you look over your span of life up to this point, what is one of the greatest gifts that life has given you that you didn't realize at the time? Just
Mhm.
one of the greatest gifts life has given you that you didn't realize at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, gosh, you have really good questions, Jay. It's like you do this or something, you know. Um, I, I would say, really, truly, those moments of adversity, and I won't pick one, but man, have they been good lessons, because they have required me to get wildly uncomfortable, to get curious, to do some really deep reflection. And I feel like that's when I've grown the most. So as uncomfortable or difficult as it seems, I wouldn't change the things that I've experienced. I really am proud of where I am. I'm really proud of the work that I've done. And I feel like even though I'm coming out of what I experienced in terms of severe burnout, I would say that I'm living my most joyful life right now in the midst of, what feels like a very complex and sometimes messy world. So I'm really grateful to have had those moments, which I really see as learning opportunities.
Beautiful. Very, very well said. So, Addy, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. This has really been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you sharing your story. I appreciate you just being raw and vulnerable and authentic and telling it like it is. I think the best way that we can all learn is to learn through experience, but learn through an unfiltered version of where those lessons occur. And I want to thank you so much. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Jay. This has just been a real treat and pleasure.
It is absolutely my pleasure. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? Let us know what you thought about this particular episode with Addy. I would love it if you would share maybe one takeaway, something that landed with you, something meaningful that you're going to apply in your life or in your business. And to listen to more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning and growing and keep doing the work to reach your potential, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.